Welcome to another episode of Distorted Opinions. Yeah, and I'm joined by Matt and Ted, and last week we talked horror music in film and television. This week, we're diving into the history of Halloween music because tonight is Halloween, so what better topic to talk about? And we're once again joined by Faith Brodi, who owns Brodi Effects, a special effects makeup company based out of Billerica, Massachusetts. Faith, welcome back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
We are going to talk about the history of music, but we're going to get into a little later in the show. I had mentioned on the previous episode that we were going to find out more about this haunted house event that you put on every year as part of your Brodi Effects business. And so we're excited to hear more about that. But first, let's get into some of the history of Halloween music. And I'm going to kind of start off with the real early history of Halloween, and then Faith, I'm going to pass it off to you because I know you have a lot of examples of songs throughout the different eras, and I'm sure we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. So from what I could find, there's an article that I found online, and I'm hoping I pronounce her name right, from somebody by the name of Colleen Cowie, who runs Pass the Mic blog, and she did a history of Halloween music. So what she was able to find was the origins of Halloween seem to have come from the Celtic festival, and again, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, Samhain, where they believe that November 1st was the beginning of the year, and then the day before, the night before, the souls of those who died would visit their homes. So that would be October 31st. People would set bonfires and wear masks to try and ward off the evil spirits. And the Catholic Church didn't really like this and apparently moved All Saints' Day, which was May 13th, to November 1st, which was possibly an attempt to replace a pagan holiday with a Catholic one. They ruled that anything that was unsettling or sounded unholy was to be avoided, so the tritone, which is often referred to as the devil's interval, was not used in any music at the time period. In fact, rumor has it the church banned the use of the tritone during the Renaissance. Then you move into the 20th century and you start to see the era of blues music, and blues music is sometimes referred to as the devil's music. First of all, the lyrics are often secular, and there's a lot of talk of voodoo and those sorts of things. But then you have Robert Johnson, who is a pretty well-known acoustic blues guitarist and vocalist from the time period. The rumor had it that he had sold his soul to the devil to be able to play his guitar. And so blues music is often associated with, in a lot of ways, the devil. And, you know, an example maybe that ties into it is Screamin' Jay Hawkins' I Put a Spell on You. The whole thing is about putting a spell on people, and that is very, very much something the Catholic Church would probably frown upon. So, you know, moving from there, that kind of set the stage for rock and roll music, which, Faith, I think is where you kind of started to see that that's where officially Halloween kind of cropped up as a genre. So I'm going to pass it over to you to talk a little bit about what you found in some of the songs that you found that fit into that genre of music.
Sure. So in my research of music regarding Halloween, mind you, I don't have every Halloween song to exist, but around the 50s and the 60s is when we started to see a spike in trends regarding Halloween. Halloween before and prior, I'm sure you've seen circulating around on Facebook or whatever social medias everyone uses, old-fashioned costumes of the 20s and 30s that were horrific, you know, like the weird paper mache masks. And so it was still like a new idea. It was Halloween beta, because trick-or-treating was kind of becoming the mainstream. And so around the 50s and 60s, towards the tail end, we start to see its effects in music, because things like Frankenstein, Dracula, all the original Universal monsters, Creature from the Black Lagoon, started popping up around the 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s. We started to have monsters in our pop culture. And that's where Halloween music kind of began. So the earliest I could find of specific Halloween music is Frankenstein's Den, and that's by Hollywood Flames, and that was in 1958. So Halloween music usually is kind of peppy, kind of groovy. So although rock is introduced, it's not quite rock yet. And that's why I come to one of my favorite songs, kind of all time. It's called The Mummy, and it's by Bobby McFadden and Dore, and that was in 1959. It is a kooky song. It's a little silly, and it's pretty much just a voice actor talking as a mummy, complaining over it. It's hysterical. I'd recommend listening to it. So he goes, "I'm a mummy. I scare people. Watch what happens if I walk up to somebody." And it's like a half of a show. That noise is in it. It's great. That's definitely in the song. But it's interesting. By the way, you might know Bobby McFadden. He is a very famous voice actor, did numerous things, but he's most well known as playing Snarf and other voice characters on Thundercats in 1985.
Oh, yes.
So he kind of rose to fame.
Oh!
So he was Snarf. But, Snarf, you know the song. But The Mummy is another variation of the 50s, the late 50s. And then the beloved of the 1962 Monster Mash, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, Bobby Pickett. And that's one of the most relatable Halloween songs for all ages. But it's still that peppy kind of 50s, early 60s groove. So that's dipping our toes into the 50s and 60s. I didn't find much else regarding the 50s and 60s. I'm sure there's plenty, but those are the points I wanted to hop on, which is Frankenstein's Den, The Mummy, Monster Mash. They all encompass the universal monsters, and that's kind of how everyone dipped their toes into Halloween. And from there, it became more mainstream. To move forward into the 70s and 80s, which I'm sure everyone has more territory on here because there's a lot more in the media regarding Halloween. But we started to see more trends in film with it, becoming more mainstream and finagling it to become modern. And so we are left with Werewolves of London, 1978, Warren Zevon, The Devil Went Down to Georgia in 1979, Charlie Daniels Band. I don't know if anybody else had any music to throw into the 70s and 80s genre.
I had Highway to Hell by AC/DC, and Sympathy for the Devil, Rolling Stones, and I'm sure we could talk about Black Sabbath and just in general their music.
I was going to say Black Sabbath in that whole that just alone that speaks right into this whole particular topic. So definitely can't not mention them here.
Probably I want to say I call it a guitar off, but ending scene to the movie Crossroads with Ralph Macchio and Steve Vai.
Oh, right.
So which was so Steve Vai played as the devil, and to Kayla's point, the blues being like a kind of like the devil's music type of thing. Ralph Macchio comes in, does a great guitar off with Steve Vai, and I recommend that scene.
Doesn't Steve Vai play both parts in that movie?
He does play both parts, but in his character, he plays the devil. So
right.
It's pretty ironic that behind the scenes you have Steve Vai that's playing both parts. Because obviously Ralph Macchio. I don't think he's a guitar player, but that's such a great scene, but something relatable to today's theme.
Sure.
Absolutely. And from here, we dive into one of the biggest turning points of Halloween in culture and in music. Let's talk about Thriller, Michael Jackson, 1982. That took
the dance is iconic. I remember being in elementary school and we wound up watching it in class. So for whatever reason, granted, great tune, but in its entirety, all 13 minutes of that music video, definitely fond memories of seeing it at an early age, and it's still such an iconic song, and the transition, like just the costume alone, I think you're going to mention, is as he transitions into that werewolf during that particular video, it definitely as a kid, yeah, that's scary. Shoot. But even then, from like an effects standpoint, from it looks like more or less a time lapse of images to get that type of transition to werewolf, that from a film standpoint was also pretty neat, given the 70s era of when that came out.
It's pretty interesting because it did encompass the film aspect of Halloween. It began with a movie within a film where it was Michael Jackson and his counterpart dressed in the style of 1950s, and that's where we saw the transformation of the werewolf. So that's a nod to the early beginnings of Halloween, the 50s. Then it jumps back into the future of 82, where they're in a movie theater, they're watching, and later on Michael Jackson himself transforms into some gaunt-looking zombie, and that's when the Thriller dance, the iconic Thriller dance, begins. But from head to toe, this whole piece, from the tune of the music, the deep voice in the background, the darkness rolls across the land. There's multi-facets to the song and its presentation that are heavily reliant on Halloween and its theme. So this is where we begin to see Halloween hop into the mainstream that maybe isn't so much of a subgenre as it maybe was back in the day, or maybe just on Halloween. Like you said, you watched it in class. So unless you're taking a Thriller class, it was that interesting enough to pursue that and show
elementary school, so probably second grade, honestly. So
wow.
I don't know. It was a different era back then for education.
And you didn't pull it up on YouTube either. I can tell you that right now.
No, yeah, no. It was definitely one of those rolling cart televisions on VHS.
Yeah.
That was a great class day.
Any day that rolling cart rolled in, it was a good class day. Let's be serious.
Right.
But
True. Absolutely true. But the last thing I'll touch upon for the 70s and 80s, unless anybody else has something to throw into the ring, is sorry, didn't want to make sure anyone else was jumping in.
oh no, I'll let you go first and see what you're gonna say, because I might have something, but it depends on what you've got next.
Sure. So the ties into movies now. So Thriller was kind of a song accompanied by a movie, but then now we see movies accompanied by song. And one in particular is by DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, which is A Nightmare on My Street, and that was 1988. And one can assume it's related to A Nightmare on Elm Street. So we start to see heavier influence of music and in film, just generally,
Right.
in Halloween music, but it's becoming less attached to just Halloween and starting to blend into daily activity and daily music listening.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my piece I had to throw in regarding the 70s and 80s.
So it's not necessarily a film music, although I can name a show that it ties into that's later on, but thoughts on Duran Duran's Hungry Like the Wolf?
Oh,
Yes.
Good
I
reference.
mean, the one thing I really remember about that video is he turns to the camera and it's just these awful, like, really badly done scratch marks. They're supposed to look like his face has been scratched up by a wolf, but, I don't know if it's direct. What's that?
It's particularly a werewolf.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know that it's specifically meant to be a Halloween song, but it's definitely a song I think of when it comes to Halloween. I think you could definitely put it on a Halloween playlist and get away with it. Werewolves, I think, kind of fall into the Halloween category. So that's, one other song aside from Thriller that from the 80s kind of stands out to me is something that would fit into that category.
Well,
and like you're saying, it's not necessarily Halloween to begin with, but we're starting to see Halloween blend into the norm. So the fact that we have to question if a werewolf is Halloween or not, if you go back to the origins, it's a monster. Werewolf is a monster. Right. It's a Halloween monster. And so we start to see the lines blur between what is just casual pop culture and Halloween and kind of blending that into one. And we'll start to see this too when we head into the 90s to modern day.
Well, let me jump right in before we get too far because, shock rock was certainly its own subsection, and obviously Alice Cooper being, monster and scary and jarring in some of in that era's music tastes, and the rebellious teenagers were all about the anti thing that the parents didn't really like. So shock rock was more of a growing theme then. Never mind Kiss with the face paint and all that, but watching Alice Cooper in concert 10 years ago now, he winds up dying in every song from a different contraption. So the shock rock thing, I mean, that's just who he is as a character, as an artist, but that whole presence and is certainly unique and obviously incorporates a lot of monsters and helps normalize that end of the culture that we're trying to speak to, I suppose. So as a supporting note, definitely need to include Alice Cooper on that.
Oh yeah,
and I think with just like what Faith was mentioning, with today's themes that are out there that relate a lot back to Halloween. Excuse me. Is I want to say that the 80s made a really, really big impact as far as utilizing those type of themes, especially when pulp culture was starting to really grow. And I think if you really reference a lot of if you watch any 80s movies that have that are like horror based, you have a lot of those synthesizers that really create those eerie tones. You have Friday the 13th, you have Nightmare on Elm Street, even the movie
Which
Leprechaun.
is also Friday the 13th. I know, Halloween, all those other, I feel like the 80s were definitely the golden era of horror movie and film. So obviously
Night of the Living Dead.
Yep. Right. So, I mean, given the groundwork in the history that we've covered thus far, I think sure we had the universe of monsters to help spark interest going into the 50s and 60s, but I certainly think Hollywood hit one heck of a stride in the 80s for the quality of horror film and what actually came out of that era, because that definitely kind of hyped up more on the horror end and helped lay groundwork for the normalization and the inspiration, or not really inspiration, but the general interest of being a fan of Halloween year round because those were done so well.
Yeah. One movie that sticks out that I feel still gets underrated to this day is Hellraiser. And if you haven't watched the movie Hellraiser, I mean, just the first one, I mean, you want to talk about something that's unsettling in just the creativity of how pretty much torture could be from, an audience point of view, but at the same time, the music behind it that creates that presence. But those have some Halloween elements to it. I mean, the main character himself, Pinhead, and then has all these kind of torturous bondage, aspects that how can you cause pain to a victim while they're still alive? I mean, there's one specific scene, spoiler, that there's one particular character that just has these hooks that just keep getting onto his skin, and they just keep going and going and going, and the music is just pumping and pumping and pumping, where it's almost like so suspenseful that this character is now just like placed all in hooks and just ripped apart. And it's just one of those aspects that back in the 80s, the music behind it and the creativity of Halloween elements of horror bring it to that whole nother level. And Ted, you nailed the nail on the coffin by saying that Hollywood really got a gold mine as far as the horror element in the 80s.
This is when people started to get more explore more into the idea of gore. And so a lot of movies in the 70s and 80s are gore happy. If you even throw it back to the 60s of when Psycho came out, the shower scene, the iconic shower scene, which we spoke about last week, you know, the woman screaming, blood all over the floor. It never shows her explicitly getting wounded, but you see the blood, which is actually chocolate sauce, getting all over the ground.
Spoiler.
I believe it is chocolate sauce. That is a fun fact in case you didn't know. I believe it is chocolate sauce.
Blood on my vanilla ice cream.
There you go. Sprinkle of blood will make it nice and tasty. But yeah, the 60s and before that, it was very taboo. I mean, Halloween already was taboo to its religious ties. And once everyone got out of that and kind of dissociated it, the 80s went, all right, well, what's the big deal? We'll show some blood, show someone getting stabbed. Let's rip someone apart with hooks. That's fine. And they started to experiment and really get into practical effects of not only creating monsters, but ripping apart people. So this is where we start to see the peak of gore and what can we get away with, such as poltergeist peeling someone's faces off, or the meat hooks, as you so to say.
Or Exorcist.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a big one. That's a big one. Makeup-wise, effects-wise, and just there even is a taboo to this day and the curse that follows it.
Yep.
You believe that or not. Mm-hmm. But the 80s is, in the 70s too, I believe Exorcist was the 70s. But
I believe it was.
People are starting to get more adventurous within practical effects with music and are less afraid to get really down and dirty with horror and grime as opposed to the suggestion of it. But ironically, the music stays kind of peppy in some instances, such as Thriller, such as Nightmare on My Street. So I love that contrast.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Yeah, kind of goofy. But if we move into the 90s... Oh,
yeah, Faith, I know that you were talking about the 90s and whatnot. So yeah, let's jump right into the 90s and whatnot, unless anyone else has got anything for the 70s and 80s.
No, I think we can jump right over.
Yeah.
We're moving right along here.
Yeah.
So the one thing that really stood out to me in the 90s is the beloved film, a Tim Burton film. He's done plenty of them, but The Nightmare Before Christmas is a big one. And This Is Halloween in particular is a very big song within it. And then Marilyn Manson covered it in 1993. So we can see the two sides of horror at this time, where it's the kooky, ooky, spooky, ooh, I'm a skeleton trying to do Christmas. And then we have Marilyn Manson. We took it a different turn. We start to see that both of these subtypes of Halloween music are vastly accepted and praised in the mainstream.
I can go on a tangent on Marilyn Manson because I believe I've seen him live more times than any other artist. But I'll save it for a different show. We've got plenty to talk about, but I can unpack on Marilyn Manson and his book of work, given what he's done. But I digress.
Yep. And ladies and gentlemen, we've said this in multiple episodes, but Ted is the god of going to multiple shows, and any of us can compare of. So be sure to be looking forward to, I'm sure just one episode where it's just dedicated to Marilyn Manson, because I'm sure that we're going to have all multiple stories of from his perspective, as well as what the show provided, to an audience.
But yeah, anyway, moving on.
Your Marilyn Manson episode, I was going to make a pun saying, did you get it? No. Do you want it? Yeah.
Oh, great reference. Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I fumbled it, so it kind of landed.
But this is the new
It tumbled, it landed.
Stand up and admit.
This is no dope show.
So many puns.
But,
oh, boy.
Love it, love it, love it.
But listen, at least we're not all chaos.
Yep.
Anyway. God,
yep.
Moving forward.
Okay, now let's jump right in. All right, so.
But if anybody else has more to touch on with the 90s, but I kind of wanted to hop into modern day and mainstream media, unless anyone else had something to add.
Go for it.
The only thing I can think of with the 90s, I mean, it's the 90s with horror and Halloween. Yeah, I feel like, so the 80s made such a big impact on the horror theme. And then the 90s jumped in, and it almost seemed like it's that they started quieting a little bit on the horror aspect of things and jumping into more of like different types of creativity aspects. If anything, with it that was really keeping up with horror, I want to say it was more on the video game basis. New systems were coming out. Nintendo 64, a PlayStation, Sega Saturn, anything like that. So that was another opening door to creating different types of games out there. A Silent Hill. A Resident Evils of the world. Nightmare Creatures of the world. Anything like that and whatnot. But that's really the only thing I could probably think of as far as really the 90s. But yeah, let's jump right into 2000s and even today.
Sure. So more in mainstream media, horror and Halloween is becoming more casual. And we start to see this, I'd say, early 2000s. That's a late, early 2000s. I'm sorry, that was kind of contradictory. But we see it in Rihanna's song Disturbia in 2008. It's a very disturbing music video of her kind of contorting. But in the pop scene, it's becoming more normalized to have such dark themes and Halloween themes. We see this again with Little Mix in 2015. They do a song called Black Magic, and that's a topic that's been skirted around since the 50s and before. But they've taken that on. It's a girl group, and we have on the opposite end, Five Finger Death Punch did Jekyll and Hyde in 2015. Yes. So on any and all spectrums, whether it be Little Mix, which is a popular girl group in the pop scene, to Five Finger Death Punch, we start to see Halloween spreading its little pumpkin seeds everywhere and becoming more of the norm.
It's that's a good visual, mental visual anyway.
Pumpkin seeds.
That's right.
Want to get your pumpkin seeds. Let's grow pumpkins around. But we even see it today. And one of the most popular artists, who I am sad to say I don't know too much about, but I have looked into her and researched her, is Billie Eilish. She kind of branded herself on that horror theme. One song in particular that I found interesting is Bury a Friend in 2019. It's just disturbing. She's crawling under a bed. There's one point where she actually spins upside down. Her eyes turn black tears. But now we're seeing artists branded on this theme that begun with Halloween, this horror theme. So to move popular music in such a haunting direction is something of such fascination to me. And I'm saddened that I can't speak more on Billie Eilish. But as far as her aesthetic and the songs I do know how they go, it's whispery tones. It's dark and minor keys. Even her more peppy songs like Bad Guy, that's a little more upbeat, but it still has that ambiance of just horror to it. So we're starting to see this blend into popular times. And I believe my prediction for the 2020s is going to be seeing more of this. We've already seen this in musicals. We already saw musicals such as Little Shop of Horrors in 82 and Carrie in 88. But the Addams Family musical came out in 2009. And right now on Broadway, if it wasn't for the circumstances, is Beetlejuice the musical. So we're starting to see this in different areas of modern day.
Well, and I will also, from a metal standpoint, being very aware, living that particular scene for so long, a lot of metal in general being quote unquote now devil's music. Obviously, the seeds were sown more on the Black Sabbath, Ozzy end, where that was kind of the invention of today's metal, and on the background end, so it kind of carried that mantra with it. But talking about the devil or death or skulls are always a part of the representation of metal, as just the, not to say counterculture, but all these scary things are just general symbols for
devil horns. Yeah,
from Ronnie James Dio. Like, he invented the devil horns, which is obviously just the hand sign used at every show that I've ever been to. So there's a lot going on the metal end, but in metal is always tended to be an underground thing. Obviously, Five Finger Death Punch is one of the well-known ones, and Marilyn Manson's well-known. But I feel like a lot of bands on the metal scene are fairly underground and wouldn't be known if you weren't in it. So with that being said, there's definitely a lot of horror themes, and a lot of metal is in a lot of minor key, which makes it more that extra spookiness, ambiance with it. A lot of bands like Demon Borgir, which wear corpse paint, which basically white with black stripes on to break up the design, is part of their image, but they use orchestra behind their metal. So now you're getting more symphonic, ode to the classical music, and some of those early horror films, that used that because that was the music at the time to help backtrack some of those monster movies and such. But you're moving that forward with some distorted guitar, and it complements well. So there's definitely a lot to unpack on that front, with how metal has always had this particular shock, scary monster aspect. And I mean, Matt, you talked about it with the Scream 3 album, the soundtrack for that movie. That was basically all metal. Freddy versus Jason, when that film, not a great film, but
a great soundtrack.
The soundtrack alone was all metal. So that there's something to be said with that. And then would be amiss to not talk about Rob Zombie. And White Zombie was the beginning of his band in the late 80s, and then moved into Rob Zombie as himself. And he has a massive fascination with those Universal monster films and horror films in general, and always winds up incorporating a lot of those themes into his songs and his stage performances. And I call them stage performances because it's very theatric. Giant devil on wheels wheeling around in the background on stage and things like that. So definitely another one that, in that same vein as Alice Cooper, Rob Zombie carried that forward to a new generation, next era, if you will, for that shock rock style monster movie / metal / rock music scene. So also big fan of Rob Zombie. I love all his stuff. I've seen him live a couple times as well. More than twice. Saw him with Ozzy, saw him with Alice Cooper. And I think I saw him a third time. I forgot he was with Manson. Saw him with Manson. Speaking of Marilyn Manson. But yeah, anyway, I digress.
No, but it's wonderful to hear how this has existed, the idea of Halloween and horror and music. It's existed far beyond modern day, but now it's more of its vast acceptance into modern culture. Like you said before, it was more of an underground scene and not too many people knew about it, and people would be labeled as, weird freaks. Oh, they listen to the devil's music. But as it evolves, it starts to resurface and become less underground and more notable in modern day. And we see influences of it in pop music now too, which never thought we'd say, because pop music is typically known to be upbeat and fun, and that origin even begun in the 80s. But we're starting to see its graces in 2020, and I predict that it will only become stronger as the times move forward.
Very true. And with those elements too, and to kind of piggyback off of what Ted was talking about, we're even seeing some of these elements in the band names. I mean, one band that comes to mind is Cannibal Corpse.
Sure.
Just think of when if you were to say that name to some person that you don't even know on the street, they're instantly going to think of a metal or a death metal type of band. If you were to say, hey, have you heard of this band called Cannibal Corpse? Instantly got to think of, okay, death metal. Because why? Because those words put together, give that sort of horror element to it. And and it goes to show, you know, that even some of the band names could.
There's a lot of band names that are.
I mean, that's just one of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of band names out there that really. I mean, it only describe, not to say only. The names just tend to be shocking, and it's almost as if bands are naming themselves to outdo another band for being, you know, just jarring in the name. So I think it's
2045. You'd be like, "Did you just see Murder, Kill, Death, Blood Splatter?" Yeah, I did.
I mean, there's
You have this great single called Rainbows.
There's a band, Cattle Decapitation. There's a band called Giant Fetus. There's bands like there's, I mean, just off the, you know, to the extreme of you know, being as edgy as possible because you can, and where a lot of metal, as I mentioned, is being underground. You know, there's still bands pushing the boundaries of what you can, you know, try to get away with. And obviously we kind of covered that with, you know, the exploration of horror and shock and, you know, things like that. You're constantly pushing the boundary, and the more you do, the more normalized it becomes. So because you've moved the marker forward so much more, that it normalizes another section that wasn't normal before.
Some ways to push it forward to is to make it normalized. You made a joke, Matt, about Rainbows as the single of Murder, Death, Blood Splatter, but there are artists who are taking that kind of extreme, which you wouldn't think it's extreme, but taking something so sweet and twisting it. There is an up-and-coming metal artist, Poppy. Poppy used to be a YouTube sensation. She was known for being very quiet, you know, straight blonde hair, very sweet, pastel colors, pastel outfits, and she goes, "Hi, I'm Poppy." Very sweet. But as her career evolved, she started doing metal music, which is interesting to see the stark contrast. But it is a push forward. It is taking it to an extreme. Just instead of the, you know, typical corpse paint and thrashing it, it took it into a direction of here's this double bass pedal and a sweetly dressed girl. So it's interesting to see how it's being twisted to modern times.
Yeah, that just made me think of the J-pop band Baby Metal, because that is definitely another. I mean, it's not quite on the monsters horror scary, but in terms of a metal, you know, mainstream and mixing pop together, you do get the it's fronted by three girls that are more or less schoolgirl uniforms to an extent, and or like maybe black dresses because it's more gothic, but you know, they don't scream, but they kind of sing kind of K-pop style, but the music is double bass and like heavy guitar, and it's such an interesting mashup. But you know, that blend and kind of tying it all forward, it's definitely pushing boundaries in a different way and exposing people to new genres, new I don't know, normalizing the gothic, scary aspects of rock into more pop era.
And this also introduced us to, you know, another genre too, you know, that was really started to become popular in the early 2000s, which was screamo. You know, you had, you know, 30 Seconds to Mars out there. You had, there's one band that actually I was introduced to, which was Flyleaf. And, you know, listen to Flyleaf, you know, they had that single, you know, Sick. And of course, you know, this is my very first introduction to, a frontman that, was female, and she had these powerful screaming vocals. But if you listen to earlier Flyleaf stuff, okay, completely 180. I'm talking, I mean, this is stuff that we're talking that you would hear on like a Christian radio, because actually Flyleaf was originally started off as a Christian band, you know. So when I was listening to their earlier stuff, I think she had the song called like My Broken Wings or something like that. But listening to that stuff and then listening to Sick, it's like having, you know, vanilla ice cream and chocolate ice cream. It's completely different. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about, is that how can we go ahead and push the creativity as far as, you know, elements, or not even so much genres, but bringing into a whole nother atmosphere of introduction to what we listen to today.
Absolutely.
And before we completely take a brief dive, I just realized that in our last week's episode, when we were talking about film, we didn't talk about Saw. That's too bad.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about that. Hello, Zep is a popular, it's the theme song.
Yeah, just throwing it out there. Sorry, spaced. Anyway,
I feel like
I was going to say,
I feel like it's like video game music. There's going to be people who are like, you forgot this movie or that show or whatever. And yeah, there's only so much we can cover in an hour. So
I know. With that, I do want to hear more about the Halloween setup.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
Faith you create every year, and I'm sure this year is possibly modified or delayed given the situation. But curious to know the background of where you started the concept and when you started putting that all together, and
Sure.
let our listeners know what, you know, as a reminder, what it is that you create.
So unfortunately, this year I have decided to cancel it for 2020, only because I felt that if I did make modifications to it, it wouldn't present quite as horrific or to the caliber I'd like it to be. You know, it's, oh no, somebody jumped at me from 6 feet away and I barely heard them. And I have it indoors and I have tight spaces. As Kayla would know, I take the entire television studio we have and I transform it into a walkthrough maze. And it often includes shrinking down hallways and having an enclosed sense to make people feel more unsettled. So for those of you who are not aware of my haunted houses, it is called GRIN. I've been running it since 2017, but technically a year before that, because I did a beta version in my own home for a bunch of friends. I had a Halloween party, and in order to enter the party, they had to go through my entire basement of the haunted house to get upstairs. And although it's not quite to the scale of what it is now, it was a start. So GRIN is a haunted house. It is a little different than other haunted houses in the way I choose to present it, because I like to make every scare unavoidable. And I'm sure we all know the person who, if you go to a haunted house, they will take their hands, cover their eyes, and run straight forward until they're out.
Yep.
What's the fun of that? You know?
Do you like
kind of
have like a brick wall that just jumps right out so they run right into it?
That's exactly what happens. If you run faster than a certain miles per hour, it just goes.
It slows you down.
Complaints, but lawsuits, schmawsuits, am I right? But in reality, what I end up doing is I have a guided group taken through. And so I take groups from 4 to 6 into individual experiences. And there's a bit more of theatrics to it, where I don't do the typical haunted house where you walk through a scene. You might know the story of the scene beforehand, like Haunted Manor, and you walk through and then somebody jumps out at you. And I think that's perfectly fine. I love going to those. I go all the time to those haunted houses. But mine is more of a theatrical experience where you are given a story and you are guided through, so you can't miss every stop. So you'll walk through, you'll stop to see one scene, and then as you're walking, something else might jump out at you. But I kind of encompass the audience into the experience, not necessarily walking through it. And this is where audio ties in. I do have several instances where I use audio in my haunted houses, one of which is the entrance room, which I like to call the panic room. This is typical of every one of my haunted houses. When you first enter the haunted house, you step into a tiny square of a room, barely enough room for everyone, and it's pitch black in there. You can't see 2 feet in front of you. And I have an audio recording play through the room that echoes, that gives you the story of what you're walking into. Last year was hotel vacancy, so you heard about the hotel and all its inhabitants and how the husband of that who owns the hotel has gone mad and has been torturing and killing subjects who are there. And then years past, I've done a fun house of horrors where you hear about the twisted circus that you're entering. But that's where audio is encompassed. And I actually use binaural audio, where you're in a room and you'll hear a whisper, but it sounds like it's over here. Or you hear someone crying and it's over here. So although not directing music, I do have that aspect to it, where it's you sit in the room, you hear this audio tape play in pitch black, and then I bring it to a height where there's screaming and everything, and strobe lights start to go off and you don't know where you are, you're disoriented. And then your guide comes to retrieve you and you head to the haunted house. So although not typical, that is an aspect to which sound is used in my haunted house. And of course, I mix music to play through the house as well, to create that ambiance. But I do have sound cues in where my endings, I will have a big scene. For example, in last year, what I did was I played the woman of the hotel, and my husband was very angry because I let people in his hotel, which is people walking through. And I said, oh no, please spare them. And as we're doing this, I'm actually lip syncing to audio that's blaring through the studio because I want to attack all the senses. And so he grabs me by the jaw, snaps it, my jaw is dangling, and every single actor comes out and floods everyone through this tiny hallway in a blaze of alarms, loud violin music, screaming, and bass booms and flashing lights. And so to overwhelm the senses is the key. And I'd like to think by clips of people screaming and running through that it did all right.
So out of curiosity on that, for obviously, I mean, just from a design standpoint and incorporating the audio into the environment that you're creating, do you create the environment first and physically walk through it, or is it kind of mapped in your head, or how do you anticipate or decide, or need to go back to the drawing board, because when you actually execute it, it comes out a little bit different than you might have thought, and then you need to adjust audio with that. It's kind of an interesting. I've never really thought about creating something like that, so I'm curious to know how that process works for you.
Sure. So there are months into planning. I usually start thinking of topics the second the haunted house ends, but that's just me. But I begin with an idea, and from there I build up, okay, who is our characters? What scenes are we going to see? Because I'm reliant on stops. At this scene, we see somebody being torn apart. At this scene, somebody jumps out at you. It's all moments. And from there, I construct the maze. I'm fortunate enough to have a space that is essentially a giant rectangle in where we place the walls where we want them to be. So I decide the twists and turns to see, where people can hide, where people are walking through. Last year, I actually had a mechanism where you walk down a hallway, a straight hallway, you walk into a room, you walk back out the same way, and you're in a different hallway, leading you through the house, because I had a shifting wall. But from the audio standpoint, is once I physically map out the idea, I have a floor plan, I go through all the mazes, and I think of, okay, here's a sound cue, here's a sound cue. And I lock myself in my basement, my recording studio band room, and I layer all the sounds, and I get that together, and I kind of place everything around that, so to say, once I have the map done. And of course, there's no such thing as a perfect diagram. There have been times where I'm putting up the walls the week before, and we go, this space isn't going to work, or time-wise, this can't work, or we need to move this wall, and changes are made. But for the most part, I have a solid basis on what I'm doing, with tweaks to be made here and there, because we only have the week before to put it up, considering it's a functioning television studio. And I don't think my boss would appreciate a year-round haunted house in our studio.
As much as he would like it.
Yeah, I think it's great. I've brought this up at staff meetings, but apparently it's unethical and we can't scare the children. But that's just an opinion. No, in all seriousness, though, everyone's very lenient on time reserved, and they actually block out ahead of time. My bosses will say, okay, you can have like this week or 2 weeks to set everything up. We cancel all reservations so no one else can book it. So I'm really fortunate to have this space to do so. But a lot of planning is involved into it, and a lot of logistics, and it's taken years to craft. 2017, the first year, of course, is not as great as it was in 2019, although still good in my opinion. And with each year, as more people come and show, we see what works, what doesn't work, and we go from there.
That's amazing.
I just have to say, having been involved in Faith's haunted houses the last several years, to the extent that usually I film a walkthrough of it so that it can be used for promotional purposes the following years, there are people that while waiting, because she only brings small groups in at a time, so there's often people who are waiting in the lobby to be able to go in. And so while there are people waiting, there have actually been a couple of occasions where there have been people that are like, they hear other people screaming in there, or they hear one of the audio cues or something.
They're like, nope.
And yeah, no, literally, they're like, either they don't even get to the point of going down the hallway to wait to go in, or I think last year you had one person that was, they got to the hallway and they were waiting outside to go in, and then they were like, I can't do it. I can't. I've heard too much to be able to do this. I can't do it. And then they ended up just waiting for their friends to go through. So, I mean, even just hearing what other people, the way other people are reacting, or hearing things that are going on in the studio, because you have no idea what's going on in there. You can't see it, but the noises are loud enough a lot of times that you can absolutely hear it in the hallway. Or there are things like the end of it, the person who's guiding you through slams the door behind you as you exit the studio, which scares the bejesus out of everybody who's waiting in the lobby. So, you know, the audio definitely has a lot to do with it. Even before you go in there, I think it kind of puts some people on edge because of what they hear, and some people are more freaked out than others. A lot of people come out and they're like, that was fantastic, like, that was a ton of fun. Then you get other people that are like, oh my God, and they come out screaming, and that's always the funniest reaction. I mean, we'll put it, if it's okay with Faith, we'll put on our social media accounts a clip that I have from the very end of, I think it was the 2018 Haunted House, where we had a high school student who did a show called Jake's Rants and Raves, and he would have normally, I think, been part of the haunted house, but he couldn't do it because he had something going on for school, and he couldn't
France, I'm pretty
participate. Sure. Yeah, so he ended up being our person who did the walkthrough, that I filmed doing the walkthrough. And let's just say that Jake is easily freaked out by anything that moves that he's not sure what it is. And so the very end of this thing is, I think, probably one of the funniest videos I've ever shot in my life.
By the way, we've seen this.
Yeah, it's so Jake is just freaking out at the end, and I'm trying, it's supposed to be a scary situation, but I'm laughing through the whole thing because of his reaction. Like, to me, because I know everybody who's in it and I know what's going on, I find it funny when people react that way. But this was hilarious because I had the camera, my coworker at the time, Amber, was holding a light for me to just be able to better illuminate it a little bit. And I thought he was going to run us, both of us, over trying to get out of there, because everybody, the end of that one was everybody who was involved with it comes out and chases you out of the room. And Jake's just like, ah, ah, ah! Like, his hands are flailing, he's screaming, he's trying to push us, and we're not moving quick enough for his liking. And it's just, it's absolutely... It's absolutely hilarious. So, Faith, if it's okay with you, I'll post at least that clip on our social media accounts if anybody wants to see just the tail end of somebody's absolutely hilarious reaction. I'm sure Jake is going to have a fit that I'm bringing it up. Yeah.
And so... the question is, for GRIN, is that open to the... It sounds like it's open to the public in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nice.
So... general admission, you can buy tickets online, but usually it's, I forgot the prices last year, about like $7 at the door, $7 to $10 per person. It's a walkthrough experience. It's a lot of fun, a lot of scares, and I'd say it's worth it. Even if you're terrified, just to have that adrenaline thrill of walking in. But I've had a decent response to it. Years past, I've had nights that have run over the time slot because we've had too many people there. We sold significant amounts of tickets as each year progresses. And it's just, I'm so thankful for the support of the community and of my workplace and of my fellow coworkers. And huge shout out to you, Kayla, for always filming and shooting different pieces of the house to use for promotional value. But 2021 is when you should expect to maybe see GRIN pop back up again.
Excellent.
So y'all are going to have to come check it out when it can...
I think we're going to have to.
2021.
2021, get ready to get spooky.
Sounds good.
So On that note, I think we are running a bit out of time, so we probably should go into our song of the week. Does anybody want to start?
I mean, I've already got mine lined up. I already mentioned Rob Zombie. His book of work is my favorite to play for Halloween. I remember calling the AAF, and I think I wound up talking to Mike Shue and requesting this particular song on Halloween. But Super Beast by Rob Zombie is my favorite song. He has so many great songs, but Super Beast in particular was one off of Hellbilly Deluxe that really stands out to me. And I'm just going to double check that I said that correctly. Yep. So Hellbilly Deluxe came out in 1998. Track number 2, Super Beast. Excellent tune. And definitely this particular album, just a side note, was one that Matt introduced me to in 99, I believe, back in the day. So it's not now nostalgic because I've been listening to it since 99, but Super Beast is a great tune. So that's my pick for this week.
Awesome. And, my song of the week, Ted, I'm going to give you kudos for this one. So my song of the week is actually going to be the Walking Dead theme.
Ah, okay.
From the composer is Bear McCreary. It won on, Ted, I remember one day you said you got to check out the show called Walking Dead. I know you're into zombies, so I checked it out. And to this day, still fell in love with it. But the Walking Dead theme, it's one of those themes that I want to say it's a slight delay of creepiness. And the way I'm saying that is because it opens up with, this little small group of strings and then becomes orchestrated later on down the road. But I think what makes it creepy is that every intro to every season was slightly different. But the very first season, I remember watching the show, hearing this theme song. I was like, okay, this is pretty different. But I think there was just one scene where it was just showing like the inside of the hospital, and it says "Dead inside, don't open." And that just kind of, for some reason, that just kind of like hit me with the theme song going, oh, wow, this is actually going to be really good. So I remember one time, I think it was around season 5, I started collecting, the seasons. And one day I went on a binge watch of just watching. And at one point I had to stop because the theme song was just getting way too much for just a reoccurrence of elements or whatnot. And but if anything, for this Halloween theme, I do love to watch Walking Dead. I know that AMC likes to do a whole marathon of Walking Dead around, the Halloween week. But I'm going to have to go with that. So Walking Dead theme by Bear McCreary is going to be my song of the pick.
Great pick.
Song of the week.
Song of the pick.
That was a great pick.
Song of the pick. Pick of the song. One of them. Not as thinking you drunk, I. Oh, with that being said, Faith, what's your song of the week?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm going to have to go with a classic from 1959, The Mummy. I mentioned this before. It's by Bobby McFadden and Dorr. And I highly encourage anyone who's listening to this right now to give it a listen, only because it's just so strange. I thought it was a joke of sorts, maybe a meme. No, it's a genuine song, and there's a story to it. There's the sound of the mummy walking, which is quite literally... And it tells the story of this mummy just trying to make friends, and no one wants to be friends with them because he's a mummy and he scares people. But give it a listen. It's very peppy, a little funky. Not what you'd expect to have a song about a mummy, but it's definitely funny. If you want to hear a mummy whining, please give it a listen. It just will brighten anyone's day regardless of the season.
I haven't heard it, but
Awesome.
I definitely will as soon as we're done recording this, because I'm very curious.
Please do.
Yeah, I haven't heard it either, so I'm gonna have to check it out for sure.
And Caleb,
So-
brings it up to you. What's your song of the week?
Let's do
Yeah,
it.
so like a real quick thing I just want to point out to tie into Matt's pick, because Matt mentioned that he was going to be picking the Walking Dead theme, and I was like, you know what? I just realized I have another Halloween type prop that I can place behind me here. So I don't know if you can see it here, but I've got my Scott Ian action figure, and for those who are not aware, Scott Ian was actually an extra in one of the episodes of The Walking Dead as one of the walkers. So the action figure actually came with two other heads that you can swap out on it. One is it comes with like screaming Scott Ian, and then the other is stoic Scott Ian, and then the third head is actually the head of Scott Ian from The Walking Dead. So
And
I was
for
like,
the audio listener, she's holding up a box of a character, a character which appears to be signed. It looks like a signed
is.
Scott Ian box.
it is.
That's pretty awesome.
Yep. Yep, it is.
So
Yeah,
an action
so
figure
it's-
you can change the heads on.
Oh, and you can also change, going back to our metal and Halloween theme, there's also an extra hand in here that's doing the devil horns. And of course, my camera is going to become possessed as soon as I start trying to show this. So you can swap out the hands and you can swap out the head. But yes, there's a Walking Dead head here. So
That's awesome.
that being said, my pick of the week should not be a
It's an
surprise.
Anthrax song. No.
No, actually, we talked a bit earlier about Black Sabbath and how a lot of their music could fit into any Halloween-themed playlist. So my pick for this week is their self-titled album and the title track, Black Sabbath, off of the 1970 album Black Sabbath. I think, in my opinion, this is the ultimate Halloween creepy. It opens with church bells, and you hear the sound of rain and thunder, and all of a sudden, bam! Tony Iommi's dark and distorted guitar comes in real heavy, and then it kind of fades out, and Ozzy's vocals come in, and the drums kind of take over. And that happens for several minutes, and then about maybe 3/4 of the way into the song, Tony's guitar comes back in real loud and heavy, and the song takes off. And if you watch the official music video on YouTube, even the video's got creepy Halloween-like visuals. The opening of it is kind of this overlay of, I don't know if it's supposed to be a house or what it is, but it's almost like a silhouette. And then you see lightning kind of flashing, and you hear the sound of the rain coming down and the thunder in the background. And it's just, as far as I'm concerned, if it's not on your Halloween playlist, Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath should be on your Halloween playlist. And speaking of playlists, we have all of our Song of the Week picks in a nice compiled Spotify playlist that you can find by looking in the description of all of our shows. And we play a little snippet of any song that we can, we play a snippet of every song that we talk about in Song of the Week, but any song that's available on Spotify, we also add to that playlist. So if you hear a song here and you're like, oh, I want to hear more of that, just click the link in the description of the video and head over to the Spotify playlist and you can hear it. So with that, that's my pick of the week. If nobody else has anything they want to add, I think we've reached probably the end of our time for this episode. But, as a reminder, as always, if you have a music-related topic that you would like to discuss on the show or you think we should talk about, feel free to reach out to us. You can leave us a voicemail on our Anchor page at anchor.fm/distortedopinions. You can also find links to all of our social media accounts there, as well as just some of the many platforms that the show is available on in audio-only format. As I'd mentioned earlier, you definitely want to be checking out our social media platforms because we'll post some video clips from Faith's GRIN haunted house there for anybody that wants to get a bit of an idea of what that's usually like. And we also post a lot of bloopers and outtakes and those sorts of things.
Yeah, behind the scenes.
Right, yep. There will be behind the scenes
That's right.
from
So-
last week and this week.
Learn how I got the skull to appear just into the camera view.
gonna
That'll
wanna
be a
check it
little
out.
sneak peek on our social media.
That's right.
Movie magic.
That's
Movie
right.
Magic.
That's right.
You're gonna want to check this out.
Check it out. And again, the links are all on our Anchor page. You can also email us at distortedopinionshow@gmail.com. You can reach out to us on any of the social media platforms as well. So there's a number of ways you can get a hold of us. And with that, thank you everybody for tuning in again. Thank you, Faith, for joining us the last 2 episodes. It's been a
Big
ton
thank you
of
for
fun.
joining us.
Oh, thank you so much
Yeah.
for having me, everyone. This has been a blast talking music and horror, 2 of my favorite things in the world. And I will sign off with don't be afraid of the dark, but fear what's in it.
Excellent.
Oh, there we go. I like it.
Absolutely.
And
With that,
and just a quick note, again, you guys are leaving us messages. You guys are reaching out to us again. We just want to say thank you again. We love interacting with you guys. Again, this is something that, we enjoy doing. And obviously we're getting a lot of positive feedback, with you guys enjoying it, not only from social media aspect, but even, outside, so it's great to hear that you guys are enjoying it. That makes us feel good that you guys are feeling great. We have, great guests like Faith, coming on and joining us. That's what's making the show, really creative.
And not to hype it up, but we've got some other guests lined up that will make some very interesting episodes before the end of the year. So
Very, very much
stay
so.
tuned for that. So we've got some cool stuff coming up.
absolutely.
Good stuff and whatnot. So, obviously it's Halloween. So, hey, be safe. Obviously it's still kind of a weird time right now, but, if you do have gatherings and whatnot, obviously, again, still be safe, dress up, have fun, and eat some candy, and do the monster mash. The monster mash! He did the monster mash. The monster mash. Okay, that's enough.
With that,
Thank you again for having me, everyone.
anytime, Faith. It was
Thank you
great
very much.
having you. Happy Halloween, everybody. We'll see you all
Halloween.
next week.
Yeah. See you later. Thanks.
Oh, no. Why?
Oh, goodness.